Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Inside Out Smile. I'm your host, Dr. Amber Q, and I've been thinking about marathons recently. There's so many different types of marathons in the UK and Europe, and I'm not sure about the rest of the world. I know there are marathons in the USA, but I'm not sure if it's that big a thing the way it is in kind of Europe. Because, we have so many sporting events in terms of running. You know, there are park runs and then there are various races. I've done a number of 5-kilometer races for various cancers. Actually, I've done some 10-kilometer ones as well for a charity for homeless people, as well as cancer charity, mouth cancer charity. It's so interesting, isn't it? And I can't remember what the other one was that I did. I did a Nike one as well, a 10-kilometer run. So it's really interesting because marathons are just huge. They're huge in the UK. And apart from things like Ironman and triathlons and things, if we just look at marathons, there are half marathons and then full marathons. And so many people run marathons in London, in Amsterdam, in Barcelona, in the Royal Parks in the UK. There's so many that people run. And for me, I've been thinking about marathons and I almost feel as if they're a metaphor for life. And please, let's be clear, I'm not a marathon runner. The max that I've ever done is 10 kilometers, and I haven't really run for a long time. I do need to get back into my sort of personal fitness post-Ramadan, but I'm not planning on running a marathon. Or, as somebody said to me, not as yet, Amber, not as yet. So never say never, although in this case, pretty unlikely. But the thing is, when you look at runners or marathon runners, there are two types of people. And I think, I suppose you can extrapolate this to different sports. But essentially, you get people who really are passionate about training. And I often think about this when it's really cold and I'm driving and I see people running and I'm thinking, oh, they're training for a marathon, but it's really cold. I'm glad I'm in the car. And then, of course, you get the people who kind of don't really train and they just try to, wing it, as one would say. And I think both these people probably end up injured. And I'm sure it's a great atmosphere at a marathon if you know someone who's running a marathon and you go to support them. And that's fantastic. But I have to admit that it really does make me think about life. And I was thinking just today that people who go through life trying to plan everything and preempt and just be careful, and versus people who just sort of wing their way through life and they're quite relaxed. If we use that as an analogy for marathon runners, it's really interesting because marathon runners end up injured. Not all of them, I guess, and I have no stats on this. But generally, obviously, marathon runners end up with soreness and, plus and minus various issues post-race. And I think it's really interesting because we can say the same thing in life. You can either be worry-free or you can worry about things and be OCD and try to sort of pre-plan things and preempt things, but things are still going to happen. And sometimes these things are, if you haven't trained, for example, for a marathon, then you're going to have issues. And equally, if you have trained and you've tried to contingency plan, you could end up just falling, hurting yourself, or something could happen. And I think life is like that. We can either plan and be as meticulous as we can be about planning, and equally we can sort of try and stroll through life without worrying. But at the end of the day, we're all going to face challenges, and those challenges may be sort of obvious, right? So for example, if you don't take care of your health, if your diet is horrible, it's pretty inevitable that essentially you'll end up with health issues. But equally, if you are really healthy, it doesn't mean that you're just going to be, if you have a healthy lifestyle, it doesn't mean that you're going to escape either illness or an accident. And I think this, for me, brings me back to, whenever I think about life, I think obviously about the Creator's Muslim and how life is so much easier when you have a faith and you put your trust in God, because we can't foresee things. And they're things that we may think are good for us, but they may not be good for us. And I don't know. And things that we think are bad for us may actually not be bad for us at all. So it's interesting, isn't it? I think this analogy of marathon runners and life, well, I find it interesting anyway, probably because I've never run a marathon. So I'm taking a different view. And I don't know, because I know people are either really passionate about it. Some people are just trying it. Some people try a half marathon. They're like, oh my gosh, never again. And some people are like, oh, we're just strolling through life. We're never going to run a marathon. And that's fine. That's okay. And for me, that analogy extends to people just, not being particularly ambitious in life. Not that I'm saying if you're not a marathon runner, it means you're not ambitious. But I mean, if we look at that analogy again, so there are people that just stroll through life and they're just happy. They're happy strolling like me, they're not wanting to run a marathon. But I think I'm confusing myself with my own analogy here. But I think the point that I'm trying to make is preparing for a marathon is like preparing for life or life circumstances. And at the end of the day, everything is unpredictable and everything is in the hands of God. And anything can happen. But obviously, if you are training for something, you are going to avoid obvious injuries. Where am I going with this? I don't really know, to be honest. I think the thing is, for me, I just think it's really interesting, right? That, obviously if you have goals and you plan for something, whatever that event is, you are better off than someone who's winging their way through it. But it doesn't matter how much you plan for anything, whether it's a career, exams, etc. Anything can happen, essentially. You could be ill, you could have an accident that prevents you from attending that event or competing in that event, whatever that event is. I think that's what I'm actually saying. And for me, I just can't imagine living my life without faith, because when you have a faith, then there's always so much meaning to life and you've got so much to do and you're on such a journey, and your life, whatever it holds, has, it's just a journey. And that's it. Life is the journey. You don't actually reach a destination, if that makes sense, because you're always striving to do more. And often that more is in service to humanity. So in a sense, I suppose that's a never-ending marathon, really, but it's a marathon of faith rather than a marathon of running. And it's interesting because, of course, marathon runners, they want to, as the lingo is, they want to excel their PB, their personal best. And I suppose as a person of faith as well, you try to improve upon your faith and compete with yourself to do that, to be better than you were the day before. So in a sense, that metaphor of marathon runners and life and faith does actually hold true. So my rambling during this episode has actually given me a bit of an epiphany that yes, marathon running, training or not training is unpredictable because life is unpredictable. And life is like a never-ending marathon because we're just always trying to improve upon our personal best. And hey, maybe this is a new model that we could create. But I do feel that it's so interesting. And I know so many people that use marathon running or just running, should I say, as an aid to mental health, as a tool for escapism, which is so interesting, isn't it? Because you can't really escape, I think. And again, this is where faith comes in, because you're depending upon your creator, improving upon yourself, and it's the marathon of life. And although life in itself, you don't reach that destination, as a person of faith, that destination is reached upon entering the hereafter, after the day of judgment. So that's so interesting, isn't it? And the prize, of course, is where you'll end up for eternity. Has any of this made sense? I don't know. It makes sense to me. I hope it makes sense to you. And until the next episode, let's all create connection and not just change lives, but save lives.